Today's daf is daf Samach Zayin on the top of the daf. Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Ichnisa lo, a woman comes into the marriage and she brings Nichse Tzon Barzel, and her husband is Chai Be'achrayus, and amongst the Nechasim was Shnei Kelim. Now, if you combine the market value of these two Kelim, it's Be'elef Zuz. It's worth 1,000 Zuz. Ushvachu, but they went up in value, and v'amdu al shnei alafim zuz. Now, when it's time for the collect haksuba, it's worth already twice the price, 2,000 zuz. And Rabbi Yehuda says the following: Echad notlaso b'ksubasa. One of these two kelim she takes for herself when it's time to collect her ksuba, and that one keli is worth 1,000 zuz, which is the value that she brought into the marriage as nichse tzon barzel. So therefore, she collects one keli. What about the second keli? The echad, the second keli, really belongs to the Baal, because any increase in value in nichse tzon barzel accrues to the Baal, as we learned earlier. And therefore, if she wants to insist on receiving the second keli, she's got to pay for it. No senes domim v'notalto. She has the rights to claim the second keli for herself, but of course she has to pay its value. Now, what if the Baal says, I don't want to give you the second keli, I want to keep it to myself? After all, it's nichse tzon barzel, mipnei shevach beis avia, right? That this is for the cover, the tiferes of our husband, our father's household. And it's a takana that was made that the Baal does not have rights to retain for himself against her will the nichse tzon barzel, but she has to pay for it, obviously, because she got her full value with the first keli, a full 1,000 zuz. So Micah Mashwan, what is Rabbi Yehuda telling me here? Shevach beis avia di dehavi, that he's not allowed to take the, he's not allowed to take the kli for himself and just pay her up. Or Rabbi Yehuda Chadazim. We already had this on Daf Samach Vavam and Beis, that Rabbi Yehuda told us that the Baal has to pay up the nichse tzon barzel, and she has rights to claim the nechasim themselves, the original be'en. He can't just pay her off and keep the be'en for himself. And that's exactly Shavach Beis Avia. Dida belongs to her. So when answers Mauda Tema, when does Rabbi Yehuda hold that had been Ima, and she could demand the kelim that she brought into the marriage of tzon barzel back? Hanimila, I would have said that's Heicha Timatila Mishkal Biksubasa, within the context and the framework of collecting her ksuba, which we call pirog ksuba. If the possessions, the actual physical nechasim, are worth the value of the ksuba, then for sure Rabbi Yehuda says she has rights to collect the actual items, the nechasim themselves, and the Baal cannot say, I want them and I'll pay you up. Aval mitan dmei umishkal. What about a case where the possessions, the items went up in value, and now they belong, that extra increment belongs to the Baal, and now she wants to pay up the Baal in order to get those nechasim, like the second keli in our case, which is worth another 1,000 zuz? I would have said, lo, she doesn't have rights to force him to cough up anything beyond the piron ksuba, because that appreciation accrues to the Baal, and he has a right to say, I want the kli. Amash Malon, that's what Rabbi Yehuda is telling me here, that even if there was a yoker, an appreciation in the value of the kelim, and that appreciation belongs to the Baal, she still has rights to pay him off damim and take those nechasim from her Baal, because those are nechasim she brought into the marriage, and we have a takana of shvach beis aviyah. So this leads us to the Mishnah on the top of Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. By way of introduction, a Kohen who has avodim, and they are kinyan kaspo, they will eat truma mikoach HaKohen, the Adon who owns the avodim. And if after he dies, the Kohen leaves sons who inherit him, and these avodim are nichsei tzom barzel, which do not return to the Isha, then the avodim continue to eat truma because the bonim, yarshim osam, they inherit these avodim, and they are kohanim. And now our Mishnah wants to address the case of a kohen who marries a bas Yisrael, Yisraelis, and by virtue of the marriage to the kohen, the bas Yisrael, could eat truma, and she became pregnant, and then her husband, the kohen, died. And we're going to see that even the ubar, the fetus in its mother's womb, is roy lirash. He is also in the parish of Yerusha to inherit the avdei of. And this ubar cannot be machil b'truma. So let's see the Mishnah. Bas Yisrael shenisei kohen, and she brings into the marriage avodim, which are tzon barzel, they're written in the ksuva. She eats truma by virtue of her marriage to the kohen, and the avodim will eat truma by virtue of the kohen, meaning kinyan kaspo. But now umes, the kohen dies, and l'chora, she should lose her rights to eat truma with the death of her husband. She's a bas Yisrael, but hinicha muberes. Now, muberes here in this context means that in addition to other children that she had from him, which facilitate and allow her to eat truma, even after the death of her Kohen husband, her husband also left her, besides those banim, mu'uberes. In such a case, lo yochlu avodeha b'truma. The avodim that she brought into the marriage as nichsei tzon barzel will not eat truma. Why not? Ibnei chelko shel ubar. Because these avodim of tzon barzel are now owned not just by the yuladim, those sons who are alive, but even by the uber. The uber also owns his portion in the Yerusha of these avodim. And since the uber has a monetary ownership right in the avodim, therefore they cannot eat truma, because the uber is not a machil b'truma, but rather show uber posel. Now, there's another case here. Besides the case of a bas Yisrael who's married to a Kohen, we have the flip case of a bas Kohen who's married to a Yisrael. So she doesn't eat truma as long as her husband is alive, but in principle, after her husband's death, she goes back to Beis Aviyah, back to the original state of a Kohenes who eats truma. However, if this Yisrael left a son with her, then she does not revert back to eat truma b'Beis Aviyah, only if he left her without any children. Now we have a case in the Mishnah where the Yisrael, who was married to this bas Kohen, left her pregnant. She has no other children from him except for the uber. And the Mishnah says in that case, our uber posel, she cannot return to Beis Avia Kinurea to eat Truma. And the Gemara later on is going to darshan Kinurea Prat Lemuberes. Now the flip side, Eino Machil. Eino Machil means if a Bas Yisrael gets married to a Kohen, and then her husband dies and leaves a Muberes, had she had a child from her husband, she would continue to eat Truma as she did during his lifetime. That's if he left her a Vlad. But if he didn't leave her any Vlad Shel Kayoma that's alive and well, but rather just this Ubar, then the Ubar cannot be Machil, his mother, Truma. And as a result, he cannot be Machil the Avodim that he inherits from his father, Truma Divrei Rabbi Yossi. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Amrulo. So the Chachamim turn to Rabbi Yossi and they say, Me'acher shehe adeta lonu al bas Yisrael lekohen. You already, and we'll see this later on, testified in the name of Shmai Vavtalion that if a Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen and he dies and he leaves a Muberes, then the Avdei Tom Barzel cannot eat Truma because the Ubar is Yoresh v'eno Machel. And therefore it makes sense that the din should be Af Bas Kohen She Niseis LeKohen Umes. Now we have a case of a Bas Kohen who's married to a Kohen and he dies. V'nicha Muberes Lo Yochlu Avodev B'Truma B'nei Chelko Shel Ubar. We have this principle that the Ubar in the Yerusha is Eino Machel Avodov. So why did Rabbi Yossi formulate his din dafka in the case of a Bas Yisrael Niseis LeKohen? Why not a case of a Bas Kohen Niseis LeKohen? So the Gemara is going to explain the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi to differentiate between a Bas Yisrael LeKohen and a Bas Kohen LeKohen. And now in the Gemara, dealing and analyzing the underlying reasoning of Rabbi Yossi that Avodim are inherited by the Ubar, and therefore they cannot eat Trumi, Boilahu, the Gemara vacillates. Taima de Rabbi Yossi, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi? Is it A or B? A, Mishum de Kasavar, Ubar b'mei Zara, Zarhu, that since the mother of this Ubar is a Yisraelis, she's a Zara, and he, the Ubar, or it, the Ubar, is considered like Gufa, has the same status as the Guf of the mother, and he's a Zar. So therefore, if the Ubar inherits the Avodim, then the Avodim are considered Avdei Zar, and they cannot eat Truma. That's one interpretation of Rabbi Yossi. Odil, an alternative possibility, is that Rabbi Yossi darshans the pasuk Emor v'yolid beiso heim yochlu b'lachol yolud machil v'she'eno yolud eno mach, that someone who's already born, he can facilitate the eating of truma on the part of others. But if he's not born and he's only a fetus, eno mach, cannot be the facilitator to allow others to eat truma. Therefore, the ubar is not machil the avodim truma. So what difference it make if the reason why the avodim cannot eat truma is because the ubar is considered a zar, or because of the mute of michenu yolid and machil? And the Gemara says the nafkamina is li ubar b'mei kohenes. So now we have a case of a Kohen who marries a Kohenes, and he leaves his wife, the Kohenes, pregnant with an ubar, can the avodim eat truma? If we go with the reasoning that an umar bimei imo is called a zar, that's only if the mother is a zar, and the uber is considered an extension of the goof, part of the goof of his mother. But here in this case, imo kohenes, not a zar, and therefore the uber is not a zar, and therefore he could be machil the avodah b'truma. But if we say that ena yolud ena machil, then even if the uber is b'mei kohenes, he's still not a yolud at the end of the day, and he cannot be machil avodim truma. What is the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi? And the Gemara says this is a subject of a machlok Rabba and Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabba, Hainu time Rabbi Yossi the Kasavar, Ubar b'mei zara zarhu. Rabbi Yossi Amar, the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi is because the drush of Yulid Beiso Hem Yochlu Belachmo, Yulud Machil, She'eno Yulud, Eno Machil. So Gemara now raises the following objection to Rav Yosef, who operates with the reasoning of Eno Yulud Eno Machal Meisvei. We learned in a brisa, Amru Lo, the Chachamim said to Rav Yossi, Me'achar she'adet alonu al Bas Yisrael leKohen. Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen and he dies, and he leaves a Muberes, and the Avdei Tzon Barzel are not able to eat truma, not allowed to eat truma, because the ubar is a yoresh v'eno machil, and the Kohen left his wife, the Bas Yisrael, pregnant. Therefore, Bas Kohen leKohen mahu. What should be the din of a Bas Kohen leKohen? And we'll see that Rabbi Yossi, after he heard this question, he vacillated about this question. Now, if you're going with Rav Yosef to Yulud Machil, V'sheini Yulud Eino Machil, it makes no difference between a Bas Yisrael Lekohen or a Bas Kohen Lekohen. There's no difference. He's not a Yulud and he can't be Machil. And yet, despite that, Lehem, Rav Yossi responded by saying, Zu Shamati V'zu Lo Shamati. I heard about an ubar b'mei imo Bas Yisrael who is married to a Kohen, and the ubar inherits the avodim. That I heard, and the avodim cannot eat. But zu, the case of an ubar, and the mother who's a Bas Kohen is married to a Kohen, lo shamati. I never heard this. I don't know if there's a tradition that the avodim are asurim b'achila or mutar b'achila b'truma. So we're analyzing this. If you're going to go with the sheet of Rabbah, that uber b'mei zara zarhu hainu dekama lahu shamati zu shamati v'zu lo shamati. Meaning, I didn't hear about a Bas Kohen who's muberes mikohen. I didn't hear that Eina Uber Machil in that case, because since the mother is a Kohenes, the Uber is not a Zar. He writes here in the note, Rabbanan Shehikchu Lo came, Savru Chatam Sheina Uber Machil Avad Mishum Yulud Machil, Ve'eno Yulud Eno Machil. And therefore, Lefichach Af Bas Kohen LeKohen Eina Uber Machil B'Tshuma Kena Sheina Yulud. Ella I Amrit, according to you, Rav Yosef, according to Rav Yosef in Rav Yosef, that Ubar Bas Yisrael and Asula Konena Machla Avodah B'Tshuma is because Yulud Machil. B'Sheina Yulud Ena Machil, my Zu Shamati V'Zu Lo Shamati. Well, what reasoning could there be to differentiate between an Ubar and a Bas Yisrael and Asula Kohen, or an Ubar and a Bas Kohen and Asula Kohen? In all cases, they're both equal because Ubar is not a Yulud and he cannot be Machil. So even in the case of an Uber of a Bas Kohen and a Su'a LeKohen, he cannot be Machil as Avodah because he's not a Yulud Kasha. So Gemara has no answer to defend Rav Yosef. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. We learned in the Mishnah that a Kohen, when he dies, and he leaves Bonim and an Ubar, the Avodim are inherited by the Ubar, and they cannot eat Truma. The Ubar has a chelek in the Avodim, and Ein Ubar Machel Avodim. Says Rabbi Yehuda name Shmuel, Zo Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aval Chachamim Omrim Yesh Lo Bonim Ochlu Mishum Abonim. It all depends upon whether the Kohen who died left children. And if he left children, they are Kohanim. And forget about the Uber. Ochlim, the Truma, the Avodim can eat Truma Mishum Abonim. They own and inherit the Bonim. That's the Chacham Shita. That an Uber is not a Yoresh. We'll see later on that you cannot be Zoche on behalf of an Uber. Uber is like, in that sense, a non-entity. So therefore, the Uber cannot be posted. But Ein Lo Bonim, if the Kohen died and he left no living children, so then the Yerusha goes to the uncles, meaning to the brothers of the Kohen who died. Is therefore Ochlu Mishum Achim. Now the Achim inherit the Avodim, they are Kohanim, and the Avodim will eat Truma. Ein Lo Achim, Ochlu Mishum Mishpacha Kula. In other words, in Yerusha, it goes to the son. If there's no son, it goes to the brothers, and then it goes throughout all the cousins and so forth and so on, all through Mishpachas Ha'av, and they're all Kohanim. So as long as the Uber is not born, then the Bnei HaMishpacha, Karov Kodim, are the Yorshim, and the Avodim eat because of those Krovim. And the Uber is not a Yorish. So the Gemara now is medayik from the words of Shmuel, who said, Zo. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi. It seems to imply that this is Rabbi Yossi's Shita, and Shmuel lo sfirle. From the fact that he says Zo, you should know, Shmuel said, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, meaning I don't buy into this opinion. I don't accept that opinion. And I hold like the Chachamim that an Uber is not a Yorish. So the Gemara asks the following kasha: is it possible to say that Shmuel holds that the Chachamim are of the opinion that an Uber has no Zechia and he can't be a Yoresh? Ha'amar le Shmuel Rav Chana Bagdasa, who's a Baal Agoda, Pok Aisi Libei Asar, gathered together me 10 people. Ye'emalach ban payu, I will tell you in the presence of these 10 people for a person, publicize it. Shamazakalu. We have a famous statement that was public in nature of Shmuel that if someone is zoche matana on behalf of an Uber b'mei imo, the Uber is kona. You see that an Uber in Choshe Mishpat, in monetary law, has a yad l'zchiyah. And how much more so in the case of Yerusha, which doesn't even require a kinyan, the Uber is yoresh b'nichsei ovid. So if Rabbi Yossi holds that yesh zchiyah l'ubar, then Shmuel is reflecting or agreeing with that same opinion of Rabbi Yossi, which is predicated on the fundamental principle that yesh zchiyah l'ubar. So why didn't Shmuel accept the Shita of Rabbi Yossi? And the Gemara answers, Elazo usvirle. That it wasn't that the word Zo Shamati means that I rejected him, but rather Zo, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that an Uber is Zocha, and I, Shmuel, agree to his Shita. The Gemara asks the following. Maiko Mashma, Shmuel actually accepts Rabbi Yossi, that means that the Uber is a Yoresh, then and this is Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. So why did why did Shmuel have to say Zo Divrei Rabbi Yossi? What do you mean Zo Divrei Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi is explicit in the Mishnah. What are you telling me Zo Divrei Rabbi Yossi? And we're saying now that Shmuel agrees to Rabbi Yossi. So our answer, Shmuel is saying that the Pligi Rabbanan Alei Rabbi Yossi, even though I agree with Rabbi Yossi, but the Rabbanan disagree. So Zu Divrei Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbanan hold that ain't Uber Zoch. He's not a Yorich. So I'm going to ask me, Pligi, is it really true that the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi have machlokas about this? Now here's a Girsa. Instead of Mosiv, the Bach has Ha'omar Rabbi Zakkai, and we're going to see from Rabbi Zakkai that there was never a machlok between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yosef, because it says in the Bryce of Rabbi Zakkai, "So edus heid Rabbi Yosef mipi shmaya v'avtali v'hodula." This halacha, this premise, this principle that an uber is yoresh the avodim, and therefore he apostles these avodim from eating truma, which Rabbi Yossi had received in a tradition from Shmaya Vavtalion, the Hodula. And they, the Rabbanon, apparently accepted it. So how could Shmuel possibly say the Rabbanon disagree with Rabbi Yossi? Rav Asi, you have to be very careful and meticulous about the language. Mik Tani, did it say in the Brisa that instead of Hodula Chacham, Kiblu Chachamim, that the Brisa testifies that the Chacham accepted Rabbi Yossi, Kiblu? No, it doesn't say Kiblu. Hodulo Ketani. Hodulo means even though they disagree with him because they had a tradition to the opposite, but nevertheless, Hodulo de Mistaber Taimo, the logic of Rabbi Yossi is very appealing, that an Uber can be Zocher, and therefore the Avodim cannot eat Truma. But nevertheless, the Chacham had their own tradition according to which an Uber is not Zocher. And they weren't going to give up on their Kabbalah, despite the fact that they understood the attractive nature of the Taina and the logic that underlies Rabbi Yossi. So they hold that an Uber is not a Yoresh, and therefore the Avodim can eat Truma. Tana Rabbana, we learned it in Brisa. Now we're talking about a case of a Kohen who marries a Bas Yisrael and he dies. Iniach Bonim. If, let's say, he left sons who are alive and well, he did not leave his wife pregnant. Now he has Avodim, which his wife put into the marriage. Elu v'elu. No matter what the category of these Avodim is, whether it's the category of Nichsei Balog, which belonged to the Isha, Nichsei Sombaza that belonged to the Baal, Ochlin, they can eat Truma. The Avdei Melug Ochlin because they belong to her. And she can eat Truma because of the children that she has from her husband, her late husband, the Kohen. Therefore, she can be Machil her Avodim. The Avdei Sombaza will eat Truma because there are Bonim that inherit these Avodim, and they are Machil, the Avodim Truma. Inichamu Beres, in a case where she has no children, she only has a fetus, an embryo, is Elu Velu Ein Ochlim B'Truma, meaning whether it's Avdei Melug or Avdei Tzombarza, they do not eat Truma. The Avdei Melug will not eat Truma because they belong to the Isha and she can't eat. She's the Israelis. She has no children that are alive and well from the Kohen. An Uber is not Machil, and therefore she cannot be Mach. In the case of Avdei Tzom Barzel, they can't eat because the Uber is a Yorech, and the Uber is an Eino Mach. However, Hiniach Bonim v'Hinichamu Beres. Here's where we have a split between Avdei Melug and Avdei Tzom Barzel. If he left her with Bonim, they're alive and well, and he left her Muberes, Avdei Melug Ochlin Kederech Shehi Ocheles. meaning that she owns the Avdei Malug, and the Uber does not have a chelik in the Avdei Malug, and therefore the Avodim could eat just like she could eat Truma, because she has Bonim. Avdei Tzom Barzel lo yochlu minei chelko shel Uber. So the Uber belongs to the father and not to the mother, so that the Avdei Malug, the Uber has no shaykhis to. She has rights to because of the Bonim. She can now be machil her avodim truma. Those are Avdei Malug. But in the case of Avnei Tzom Barzel, who belonged to the father, and now after the father's death belonged to his Yarshim, and the Uber is one of the Yarshim. Therefore, since the Uber is posel v'eno machil, the avodim of Tzom Barzel cannot eat truma because the Uber is part of the Yerusha. He has his chelik in the avodim of Tzom Barzel. And that's Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Now, Rabbi Yossi's son is Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Bar Yochai are going to disagree in this last case of Hiniach Bonim v'Nicha Muberes. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv. When the Kohen dies and he leaves both an Uber and a Bas Macheles, she can be the conduit for the Avdei Tzom Barzel Truma. But Haben Eno Machel, if the Kohen left Uberes, an Uber plus a Ben, then Eno Mach, because not only is the Ben who's alive and well an heir to these Avodim and owns the Avodim, but also the Uber is Yorish. So we'll have to see exactly the difference between Bas Machelis and Ben Eno Mach. That'll come down the line. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Omer, if the Kohen who died left Bonim Zecharim and an Uber, Yochlu, the Avodim can eat Truma, and it makes no difference whether it's Avdei Malug, which belong to the Isha, since she can eat because of the Bonim Zecharim, she could also be Machil her Avodim, and the Avdei Tzom Barzel, they can eat Truma because of the Bonim Zecharim that inherit the Avodim, the Avdei Tzom Barzel. So we're not concerned at all about the Ubar, right? That maybe the Ubar is a Zachar and he can Yarshin together with the Bonim, and the Gemara is going to explain later on. This has to do with Rov and Miyud. Now, Hiniach Kulon Nekevos v'Ubar. What he left behind him were girls plus the Ubar. Lo Yochlu, the Avodim cannot eat Truma, because the Ubar is a Yorish on the side that he is a male. Because when you have children, a male and female, the male children inherit, not the female. And would be Choshi Shem or Zacharein Lebanus Mokama Ben Klum. So again, if it's Charim the Ubar, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Avodim could certainly eat Truma. But if we don't have Zecharim, but rather Nekevos, then the Avodim can't eat Truma because maybe the Uber will be the sole Yoresh, and an Uber is not Machil B'Truma. So it's interesting that in the case of Hiniach Bonim Zecharim and an Ubar, we're going to assume that the Ubar is not a Zach, and he cannot Yarsh. The Bonim are the Yarshim, and therefore the Avodim, whether it's Tzom Barzel or Malug will eat truma. But in the case where there are only nekevos, so then we are choshesh that the uber might be a zocher. So the Gemara is now going to ask the following question. In the case of kulam banos, that the avodim cannot eat true because maybe the uber will turn out to be a zocher, my area. Why does he say Shema Yimtza Uber Zocher? Typically, the Nekeva Nami Psola. Even if the Uber would be in a Nekeva, and therefore, together with the other Bonos, has the right to inherit the father, the Avodim could not eat Truma because the Uber has a Chelik in Yerusha if she's a female, even if she's a female. And an Uber is Yorish Ve'eno Mach. So the answer is Chadavi Od Kama. The Tana really wants to give two reasons why the Avodim cannot eat Chada. One reason is because Dine Kevanami Psola Basla, meaning even if the Uber is going to be a Nekeva, and therefore she yarshins together with the Bonos, and an Eved cannot eat Truma because of the Chelik of the Uber is an Enomach. The Od, and furthermore, Shema Yimtza Uber Zochar, how much more so if the Uber turns out to be a Zochar, and Bonos, B'Makam Ben Klum, the Nekevas don't inherit, only the Zochar will inherit. On the tzad, the Uber is a Zochar, and he cannot be Machali Avodim Truma. Now the Gemara goes on to clarify the words of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who says that if the Kohen who died left Bonim Zcharim Yochlu, Avodim could eat Truma. And the Gemara asks immediately, wait a minute, there's also an Ubar, Vayika Ubar. And we have to worry about the possibility that the Uber is a Zachar, and on the side that he's a Zachar, he also is a Yoresh, no less than the other Bonim. So he takes his Chelik in Avodim and he passes the Avodim from eating Truma. And the Gemara answers, Kasavar, Shimon Bar Yochai holds, Ein Chosheshin Lemiut.